Hello, this is Ken Haze, and today's topic is distortion, specifically harmonic distortion. Harmonics are frequencies that are integer multiples of some fundamental frequency. The harmonics of a 100 Hz tone, for example, are 200 Hz, 300 Hz, 400 Hz, and so on. There are types of distortion that can create frequencies that are not harmonics of a tone's fundamental pitch, such as intermodulation distortion, but many different processes can cause harmonic distortion, and it is sometimes desirable as a music effect, while it is sometimes an obnoxious reality of music production that must be mitigated. Obviously, the electric guitar is well known for frequently being played with an intentionally distorted tone, while a side effect of dynamic range compression, limiting, and maximization in the production of music is undesirable harmonic distortion. Note, of course, that the presence of harmonic content by itself is not indicative of distortion, because the different timbres of different musical instruments are a result of the differing amplitudes of harmonics above the fundamental frequency. As a quick example, let's look at what happens to a guitar string after it is plucked. Obviously, it starts oscillating. Here, we show the pattern in 2 dimensions, when it is in fact elliptical, but this is a satisfactory simplification for the present analysis. It seems obvious that the middle of the string would move with the greatest amplitude, and the edges near the nut and saddle would move less. But wait, there's more. As the string is also more resistant to moving near its ends, points near the end in fact lag behind the middle. The second picture demonstrates this. The center of the string reverses its direction more quickly than points near the ends. This results in an oscillation of twice the fundamental frequency, as shown in the bottom picture. This can continue to infinity along the harmonic series. Next, let's see what happens when we add some harmonic content to a sine wave. Let's let f of x equal sine of x, and we'll let g of x equal sine of 3x. And we'll plot these functions from x equals 0 to x equals 2 pi. Notice that g of x has 3 positive peaks, or relative maxima, while f of x has only 1. Obviously, this means that g of x has 3 times the fundamental frequency of f of x. Now let's add f of x and 1/3 of g of x. Why 1/3? Well, a gentleman by the name of Chuck Fourier determined that any periodic waveform could be decomposed into sine wave constituents that, when added to one another, reconstructed the original waveform. We won't worry about the theory involved here, but let's have a look at what happens. The resulting waveform has an analogous appearance to what would result if we, say, played a 100 Hz sine tone along with a 300 Hz sine tone that had 1/3 the amplitude. Now let's continue this pattern. Let's add a 5th harmonic at 1/5 the amplitude, a 7th at 1/7 the amplitude, and so on, and we'll continue to the 15th harmonic. Does this figure look familiar? It is in fact an approximation of a square wave. Let's attempt the same exercise in Ableton Live. However, rather than individually creating the sine waves and adding together, which we could, we will simply select the operator instrument, select a fixed pitch. We'll use 441 Hertz because it will be useful in one of the next examples. And set the wave to square 8, which is exactly the figure that we created in Wolfram Alpha. It is a square wave approximation created by 8 total harmonics. And that is what it sounds like. Now, let's insert a MIDI clip. It doesn't matter where we put the note because the oscillator has a fixed frequency. And then, let's freeze and flatten the track. Then let's zoom in. Does this look familiar? It does, in fact, have an analogous appearance to this figure in Wolfram Alpha. The X and Y scale differ, but if we count the number of individual peaks along the continuous peak of the waveform, since an idealized square wave flatlines, we'll see that the number is the same. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Surprise, surprise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But why do various processes create distortion in the form of harmonics? Similar to how intentionally adding harmonics to a sine wave can create other waveforms, such as a square wave. Let's approach this question from another angle. Let's look at Audacity. Let's add a mono track, and then generate a tone, a sine wave, of 441 Hertz, the duration of 5 seconds, and an amplitude of 1. Let's zoom in. We can see the individual samples here represent a sine wave. And in fact, let's look at the number of samples it takes for 1/2 of a period. It is in fact 50 samples here. Let's open a calculator, and we can double it for one entire period, making it 100 samples. Let's divide 100 by the sample rate, 44,100 Hertz. That gives us the fraction of a second that one entire period of this waveform takes. Let's store this number in memory, and then divide 1 second by this value. And we get 441 Hertz, exactly as expected. Now, let's duplicate this track, and let's digitally clip it. We'll set the threshold to -6.02 decibels. This effectively is 1/2 of the amplitude of the original signal. And we'll apply makeup gain to increase the signal back to the original peak amplitude of 0 decibels from full scale. Now let's play these two tracks. It's obviously the sine wave we're all familiar with. While that example clearly has additional harmonic content. But why does it have this additional harmonic content when the period of both waveforms is the same? We can see that 100 samples is one complete period of both waveforms, meaning their fundamental frequency is identical. Well, remember when we saw the 8 harmonic square wave, it did approximate this flat line, though it oscillated 8 times, in fact, near the peak. But to create a perfect flat line, it actually requires more, and in fact an infinite number of harmonics, adding more high frequency. But let's think of another intuitive physical reason why we might perceive this clipped digital waveform as having more high frequency content than the original sine wave. Well, Remember that frequency is related to the speed or the rate of oscillation of the oscillator, whether it is a loudspeaker driver or a guitar string or whatever else. And notice that the peak amplitude of both of these waveforms is also identical. It's 0 dBFS. Let's observe the number of samples that it takes each to reach its peak amplitude. This should be 25 samples, I suppose. Here's the maximum amplitude, because it's 1/4 of a period, or 1/2 of a half period. However, the bottom waveform reaches peak amplitude in only 9 samples. Now, because the peak amplitude is the same, the fact that the bottom waveform reaches maximum amplitude more quickly means, in fact, that this portion of the waveform is representative of higher frequency content. The loudspeaker driver, or whatever transducer, is moving faster to achieve the same peak amplitude. Now, if it were moving faster to obtain a higher peak amplitude, not possible, of course, since we started at digital maximum, then it could simply be a louder signal. However, when we clip the signal, reach peak amplitude faster, that means that the loudspeaker driver, the transducer, is moving more quickly. And quicker movement means higher frequency, right? So these are still the same note. You listen to this. We listen to this. And we listen to this. Those are the same pitch, but there's more high end on the bottom waveform in the form of high frequency content. So we've seen two analogies for why high frequency content can leave the fundamental tone intact while changing its timbre. As a side note, why does the 8 harmonic square wave continue to oscillate? It doesn't simply flatline like the clipped waveform in Audacity. Well, the obvious reason is that we added only 8 harmonics, which causes it to oscillate 8 times near what is, in fact, a flat line in a perfect, ideal square wave. The flat line is a result of the digital clipping applied. A digitally clipped waveform will attain DC for some duration, rather than continuing to oscillate. But remember that sound, by its nature, is oscillatory, and therefore this hard-clipped waveform is not representative of a natural acoustic signal. A speaker, like a guitar string, behaves like a damped oscillator and doesn't like to stop instantaneously like the digitally clipped waveform would suggest. Even audio power amplifiers are oscillatory devices. After all, they amplify oscillatory signals. Therefore, distortion from an amplifier also does not have an infinite number of harmonics, allowing it to have a perfect DC flatline. In fact, creating a perfect square wave, like the square D waveform in Ableton's operator, requires harmonics out to infinity, while we stopped at the 15th harmonic. Therefore, an idealized square wave cannot exist in the physical world, but as our hearing is capped at 20 kilohertz, we can get close enough. But we don't often digitally clip waveforms. We might want to as a musical effect, but it's not frequently applied in the production process or the mastering process. However, if we take this 441 hertz sine wave again, and we add a compressor after it, and we'll maximize the threshold right now so no compression is being applied, and we add a spectrum analyzer, we can see if we play the sine wave, there's a peak at 441 hertz, exactly as we would expect. However, watch what happens as we begin compressing the signal. First, it will simply increase in volume because we haven't reached the signal yet. But we can see that harmonics are being added. This is 3 times the fundamental frequency, for example. Compression is the same as clipping, except in the analog domain rather than digital. And of course, we can add digital clipping as well. applied to reduce overly dynamic musical performances, unevenness, or to make drums punchier, or to increase the overall volume of a track. But we can see that it's introducing harmonic content that was not part of the original signal. Even very good compression algorithms, such as isotope ozone's maximizer, for example, still introduce this extraneous frequency content. There we can see as we dramatically
decrease the threshold,
harmonic content is added. This is why, beyond simply making a song or recording feel flat, excessive compression can add audible distortion in the form of high-frequency content. Sometimes this is desirable, the electric guitar, as we discussed, and in fact we can see that Ableton Live has effects such as saturator or overdrive, which attempt to emulate more analog forms of harmonic distortion compared to the digital clipping that we did in Audacity. And saturation is frequently used on many different types of sound sources to add sizzle, warmth, or intentionally create a low fidelity sound, as might be obtained from a broken amplifier or a half-blown speaker that still is partially functional. High-frequency content that is harmonically related to the sound's fundamental frequency can obviously add excitement and sparkle. However, when it's undesired, as in the case of excessive maximization to achieve extremely loud song masters, it can be truly grating to listen to. Understanding what harmonic distortion is, what causes it, and when to use it and how to avoid it can help your understanding the conceptual basis for various procedures in production. There are many great tutorials on the actual process of using compressors, maximizers, saturation plugins, and other harmonic distortion creating effects, and I may well make one myself in the future. But for now, thanks for watching, and like and subscribe for more music and tutorials.